If the client is moving in the sagittal plane, which axis of movement are they moving within? Hi, I'm Hayley from Parallel Coaching, and in today's video we're going to explore that mock question. This is a question that sometimes comes up in the level 3 anatomy and physiology exam, and therefore we use this as a mock question to help you learn and understand how to answer these questions, but also to help decipher your knowledge and give you the answer so that you are better prepared for your exam. Before we get started though, if you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel, click the red button so you can get more videos just like this. And also make sure that you check out the link that is alongside this video where you'll find 3 mock questions to further test your knowledge. And you'll also find more information on the anatomy bootcamp that I'll talk about in a moment. So first of all, let's dive in and understand more about this question. The question is asking about the sagittal plane, which is a plane of motion, and it's also talking about the axis of movement. Now, these two concepts are interrelated. They are of the same thing, but they are not the same thing. So we're going to explore about each of these individually and how they link together. So you understand about sagittal movement, but you also understand about axis of movement. So these two concepts both need to be understood. Then we can answer the question. But before we kind of dive into that, we need to know about movement in general. This question is not talking about exercises. It's not talking about squats or bicep curls or ab crunches. It's talking about movement, and this is joint actions. And joint actions occur whereby 2 bones, or at least 2 bones, meet, which creates a joint. It's where joints articulate. And this joint articulation creates joint actions, which allow us to create the exercises and the movements that we do. Now, as a result, we need to understand joint actions, planes of motion, and axis of movement. So first of all, let's explore the planes of motion that we have. Planes of movement are essentially 3 categories. You've got sagittal plane, frontal plane, and transverse plane. We're going to just look at sagittal plane today because that's what this mock question or this question is asking us. Sagittal plane includes particular joint actions, and it's categorical. It's basically a case of saying only flexion, extension, and also plantar flexion and dorsiflexion are included in sagittal plane. No other joint actions fit into the sagittal plane. And we're talking about the sagittal plane being an action-related category. It's not a whole exercise or a whole movement that lots of things happen in the body. It's one joint whereby one joint action is occurring, and in that joint, what is the action and how does that relate to the category? That's what we're looking at. So the plane of motion that we're moving in is basically like saying, are we 2D or 3D, and the dimensions that we're moving within. So sagittal plane is for movements that are flexion and extension. That's going to be things like flexion of the elbow and extension of the elbow when you're doing a bicep curl. It's things like flexion, extension of the knee, whereby you're doing like a hamstring curl or a leg extension. It's also plantar flexion and dorsiflexion when you're moving through your ankles. It's also going to be flexion of the spine, extension of the spine. You can also get flexion and extension of the shoulder, of the hip. So these are the motions we're talking about, flexion and extension. Now these fall under the sagittal plane category. Now also within sagittal plane category are going to be any axis of movement that relates to medial-lateral. And this is what the question is really asking, is once we know that it's sagittal plane, how do we then take that information and relate it to axis of movement? Now an axis of movement is essentially the axis that something moves around. It's the point that stays still when something else is moving. Take the Earth, for example. It spins on an axis. So we've got the axis and then it's spinning. It's this imaginary line that runs through that allows movement to happen around it. The same happens inside our joints. It's an imaginary line. It doesn't actually exist, but we can use it to demonstrate and show how actions occur. So for example, if we've got flexion and extension happening in the elbow, as we've got that flexion and extension, we're going to be moving around an axis. If you were to poke an imaginary line all the way through your elbow from medial to lateral, so that's going to be this position all the way through the elbow going side to side, then we can, as we turn that rod around or that axis, we're able to move around that axis. And that's the relationship between the plane of motion and the axis of movement. And if you understand one, you understand the other. But you need to know that these two are linked together. So its medial-lateral axis is linked to the sagittal plane. So here we've got this rod that goes through from medial to lateral, and that's going to allow us to have movements of flexion and extension, which is what is categorically linked to the sagittal plane. So understanding this means that we can't now have a rod that goes from front to back, anterior, posterior, and we can't have a rod or an axis that goes all the way down through, which would be longitudinal. It has to be something that is going from one side to the other side, which is going to be the medial lateral axis, is responsible for all of the sagittal plane movements we have, which are going to be flexion, extension, and also plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. So it shows now that there is a link. They are associated together, that essentially if you've got any sagittal plane action, then it must be going around the medial lateral axis in that particular joint that is moving in that sagittal plane. Hopefully that makes a lot more sense for you in terms of understanding how to answer this particular mock question about if you're moving in the sagittal plane, what axis of movement are you also moving within? Now, if you need more help with your anatomy and physiology knowledge and you want to understand things much deeper so you can pass your exam with confidence and the next time that you do it, then all you need to do is to find out more by clicking the link that is with this video, and you'll go to our revision bootcamp area. Now, the revision boot camps that we have are for level 2 anatomy, level 3 anatomy, and level 3 nutrition. And these help you prepare for your exam so that you can learn easily and so that you can pass with confidence. So please do make sure you check out that link so you can find out more. Thank you so much for joining me, and remember to drop a little comment below and let me know what your big takeaway has been from today. Take care.